Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do another video about color grading. So I'm going to be walking you through my process in Resolve. This time we're going to be doing it with a wedding film that I shot very recently under a company called VW Weddings. They're a company that I work with quite often, and I will often be brought on to be lead video and editing for that wedding company. And so this is one that I shot quite recently, and so we're going to go over 3 different shots, and I'm going to just kind of coach you through how I would go about color grading this in Resolve. Now I will say this, when I shoot weddings, not every wedding I color grade in Resolve. A lot of the time I just edit in Premiere and color grade through Lumetri, and that works just fine depending on the caliber or the package of the wedding. But when you're doing higher end weddings, sometimes Resolve can be a nice tool to use. And if you're wanting to get those top tier results, I definitely would recommend Resolve. It's the color grading platform of choice for pretty much everyone in the industry. If you're color grading in something other than Resolve, then you're missing out because it has fantastic tools, and I would say that it's definitely the superior color grading platform or program to use. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. I'm going to walk you through what I would typically do for a wedding color grade. So here we are in Resolve. Now, when you're color grading a wedding or really any project, chances are you have quite a few clips to work with. And so when you're color grading, you need to basically create a formula or like a node structure, as we'll kind of talk about later, that is replicable for all your different clips, or at least sections or scenes of your film. You want it to be able to translate from clip to clip without having to go in and, create custom, keys or anything like that for every single shot. That becomes very, very tedious, and you end up wasting a lot of time doing that. For something like maybe a feature or, something where you have more time to work on it, maybe that's great. You can go in and have the time for every single shot to just make it perfect and be super custom for every single grade. But for the rest of us, we have a lot to get through in not the most amount of time. And so we really need to make our grades count. We really need to make sure that it's transferable, so we can slap it on one clip to the next, to the next, to the next. And for the most part, everything will hold up. And then we can just go in and make minor changes if necessary, but we don't want it to be necessary for every single clip that we do. So as I walk you through this, I'm going to kind of show you what I do to try to make that possible. So we're going to start here. We have our first node. We're going to go ahead and label this. We're going to go ahead and call this balance. We're going to go ahead and add a new node, a serial node, and we're going to label this as our primaries. Going to add another node, another serial one. We're going to call this our look. Then we're going to go in, add a layer node, and we're going to call this our skin. Now, if you don't know what a layer node is, I have talked about this in a previous tutorial, but if this is your first time watching this channel or you aren't familiar with Resolve, a layer node basically means that whatever node is on the bottom, so if we're looking here, our look would be, the top, and our bottom would be skin, whatever is on the bottom is going to show. And so basically when you have effects applied on, say, your look, and then you add effects on your skin, well, your skin is the one that actually is going to show up. If you have your skin layer enabled, then anything below it isn't actually going to show up, which maybe sounds kind of counterintuitive, but where this comes in handy is when you start to key out certain elements, our skin, let's say. So if you create a look and have, a lot of color contrast going on in your look, what you can do is then actually key out your skin, and it'll take that the original colors from your image, and that'll show up in your skin. And so that's very, very helpful for a non-destructive workflow. And with that said, we're going to go ahead and add another we're going to add another layer node. So we're going to come in here, add another layer, and we're going to call this our greens. So these days, there's kind of like a look where you have quite, instead of bright, vibrant greens. You have quite kind of dark and moody and muted greens. And so I'm going to try to go for that look. I see a lot of that all over the place on Instagram, Facebook, wherever you are finding your content. Very, very popular look right now. And maybe that's not for you. Maybe you want to try something different, but I'm going to go for something like that today. And just kind of give you guys, let you guys kind of see what that looks like and how to achieve that look. And now I'm going to come in and add another serial node, and this is going to be our global adjustments. I'm going to add another node. I know these are a lot of nodes, but trust me, it looks good down the road. We're going to add a vignette, and we're also going to add a layer of glow. I went over this in my last video here, my last color grading tutorial, and I talked about glow a little bit and showed you guys why I use that. Especially for weddings, I find glow is really, really that, secret sauce that makes everything, look quite soft and flowy, and I don't know, whatever adjectives or verbs you'd use to describe, that kind of like wedding, dreamy, like color grade that a lot of people want to go for. Glow is a great, great way to achieve that. I find that it just really brings out like some really good saturation. There is such a thing as bad saturation, but this actually, it brings out a nice saturated image, but in a way that feels, quite smooth in how it addresses, skin tones and different color roll-offs. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to add this last node that I've added here, and we're going to call it our LUT. So this is basically just going to be our conversion LUT. I tend not to use LUTs a lot unless I've kind of created custom LUTs for my camera and the looks that I want to achieve. But what is really helpful is conversion LUTs. When you're taking log footage like this, where there's, basically zero contrast, zero saturation, eyeballing that stuff can be really difficult. And I think even for professional videographers or filmmakers or colorists, it's very difficult to take a log image and bring it to a normal kind of color profile, a normal kind of jumping off point, just because it's so decreased in those values. And also it's not done in a way where it's just, you boost your contrast and you boost your saturation, now it's converted. That's not how it works. It's actually a log curve. So if you think about your curves adjustment layers, you have like S curves and these different styles of curves. And so log is actually a curve. It's not a linear line. That's not how it deals with that compression or that contrast ratio. It actually deals with it in a curve. So you basically need to combat that curve to bring it into a Rec 709 color space. And so if you're doing that by eye, it's very hard to get it right. And so what I like to do is actually use conversion LUTs. So for example, I'm shooting on the Red KOMODO. And so on Red's site, you can actually download a Rec 709 conversion LUT. And there's different variations of it, different contrast ratios and highlight roll-offs that you can choose from. And so I'll go over that right now. So if we scroll down here and we go under LUT and I go under Red, then you can see there's all these different options here that we can choose from that I have pre-loaded in. So basically, I'm going to go under our medium contrast. I find that looks quite natural. That's a good starting point. It's not too much contrast that we already, have pushed our image quite far, but it just brings it into a normal space. And then from there, we can, add more contrast and saturation in the parts of the image that we want to do that. And so I usually go medium contrast, then I use a soft roll off. I find that this it produces, at least from my perspective, the best looking results in those highlights. It keeps them nice and soft so that it doesn't go nuclear all of a sudden when those values start to get quite high. But instead it kind of, plateaus quite nicely when you get those brighter parts of your image. So I'm going to go ahead and select this, and you'll see right away, okay, this image has been converted. So if we, toggle this on and off, that's our log image, that's with our LUT. It's already looking great. right? Like that difference from log to Rec 709, that alone, you look at that image and you're like, wow, that looks so much better. But we don't want to stop there, right? We can see a few things wrong with this image. I can tell this image, we were shooting it, at that, that section of sunset where, we're kind of getting into blue hour here. So you can see that our image is a little bit more on the blue side. I don't personally want to camp out here, so I want to warm our image up a little bit. It's a wedding. We want it to be, to feel warm and inviting. So we're going to warm our image up. We're going to deal with our contrast a little bit. We're going to make sure that our skin tones, pop out. And so we're going to go ahead and do all this, but this provides us with a really, really good starting point. So let's go ahead and dive into our balance. This is where, so for me, because this is a wedding, I did not shoot this in RAW. So if you remember the last video that I did, I was talking about a RAW workflow with the Red Komodo. And so whenever we were creating or adjusting our color temperature or our exposure, what we did is we actually went into our RAW camera settings, which you can see right here. And all of these are disabled right now because this is shot in ProRes on the Red Komodo instead of RAW. And so we don't have access to any of these parameters. But in the last video, we were able to, go into here. We were able to adjust our tint and color temperature and, our exposure. We were also able to adjust our ISO, which is, how we would try to adjust our exposure, because that was the most non-destructive way to do that. But when you're shooting in ProRes, all these settings are baked in. And so this is like shooting on most other cameras, right? Where what you shoot on is kind of what you get in the final result. And so your ISO is already baked in, your color temperature is already baked in, all those settings are a part of your footage now. And so you can adjust them after the fact, but it's not going to be non-destructive. It's not going to be as if you shot it in RAW. And so here's how we're going to do that now. So we have a separate layer for our balance. So instead of just going into our camera raw settings and adjusting those parameters, we're actually creating our first node is that balance. So this is our color correction. If you think about, color grading, there are basically two steps in that. There's color correction and color grading. Color correction is bringing it to the correct or accurate exposure. It's bringing it to the correct and accurate white balance, so that your image looks proper, the way that it was supposed to be shot. And whenever you shoot something, sometimes it's perfect, but usually it's not always perfect. It's close, but not perfect. And so you want to, add those finishing touches to basically correct the way that it actually was shot in camera. And so that's what we're doing right now with our balance. So we're going to go in and we're just going to grab this eyedropper. And it's really easy with weddings because most shots that you have the bride in it, and they have a wedding dress, which usually is white. And so it's very easy to set a white point, makes life a whole lot easier. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to grab this eyedropper and we're going to select a part of the dress. And you can see right there, nice and easy. We just got a way more accurate white balance in not a lot of time. And that actually looks quite great to me. Our temp and our tint have been reset a little bit here. We have gone a little bit towards the green side of things. We have warmed our image up a little bit here. So it looks a lot better. Before we were looking quite cool, it almost looks like winter, and we're in the middle of summer here. And so this brings it back into the ballpark that we want to be working in. As far as exposure goes, it looks like our skin tones are sitting not too far off, but we might want to brighten this image up ever so slightly. I want to be careful with that because, when you're shooting sunset, you still want a lot of that color in the sky. You don't want to blow the sky out and lose that detail, because that's a really, really important part of sunsets. That's why you shoot during a sunset. And so I'm going to go into our curves here, and I'm just going to grab a midpoint here and just bring our exposure up ever so slightly, not too much. I'm looking at my scopes here, so you can see you can see the full range of our image, right? Like nothing's clipping in the blacks, nothing's clipping up top here. You can see our brightest parts. This sky up here is basically this line here. And then if you look below that, then we're looking at, okay, this is probably, you know, where our skin tones are camping out. This is probably the dress here, the white shirt, those are gonna be the brightest parts. And so we're looking at this, basically this clump around here is where our skin tones are. Right? And so typically somewhere in this range tends to be where we want our skin tones to camp as far as exposure goes. Along this line is usually where I aim, maybe a little bit below is where I aim for my skin tones. And that just keeps them around the right exposure. We're making sure that we don't get them too bright or too underexposed. They kind of camp out in a natural spot where they look the best. I'm gonna bring them up ever so slightly just because it's a wedding. For weddings, everyone they want it to look bright, they want it to look quite kind of dreamy and airy, and so we want to do that. And so next we're gonna go on to our primaries. This is where we're gonna, you know, bake in a little bit or create a little bit more contrast for us to work with. So we're going to add a little bit of contrast into our image, so that we get into more of the ballpark that we want to be working in. You can see before and after, you know, not too much, but we're just wanting to give ourselves a little bit more contrast, a little bit more color. And that way when we create our look, we have a little bit more, you know, juice to work with here. Add a little bit of saturation. There we go. That's bringing us into a nice kind of territory there. We're gonna move on to our look. And this we're gonna do through our primary wheels again. And we're basically going to use our lift and our gamma and try to create a bit of a look here. And I'm gonna do basically the same thing we did last time, is that kind of teal and orange. Again, there's a scientific reason behind it. Teal and orange, opposite sides of the color spectrum, and orange is where our skin tones tend to fall. So I find especially during something like sunset, you're gonna get a lot of oranges in the sky. So you want to accentuate that. You're gonna have skin tones if you have someone in frame. And so you have oranges in your sky, your skin, and then even in this image, we can see like some of these mountains already have some blue kind of falling into those shadows. And so we just want to bring that out. We want to accentuate that. When I'm color grading, I try to work the best I can with what I have. I don't necessarily want to create something totally different. What I want to do is accentuate what's already there. And so I can see that, you know, I have some orange in those highlights in the sky. I have some orange in their skin. I have some blue in these shadows. And so teal and orange is probably the best look for this image. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring our lift towards that blue a little bit. Okay, this is the same thing as last time. So basically, as I said before, with our layers, we want to disable these other two layers so that the changes we make, we can actually see. And then when we go in and change our skin and our greens later, you'll see we'll enable those layers, but only have them apply to certain parts of the image. So again, with our look, we're gonna add some of that blue in. Yeah, you can see there, we are getting that blue in our shot. I kind of like that, more of like a teal. I like how that looks in that mountain and some of these trees. And then we're gonna bring that orange up a little bit, try to get, you know, a nice tone. You know, if we go too far up, we get that magenta. If we go too far down, we get that green. We wanna find a nice middle ground where it just looks really, really good on their skin. Yeah, something like that's looking pretty good. I feel like we're falling a little too far towards green, so I'm gonna bring us up towards that magenta. Just wanna really balance it out. There we go, we see before and after. So we're getting more color contrast, right? Before, again, we were still quite blue, and I think our look has brought us to more of a natural ballpark there. I think we can bring our blues down a little bit more though. Let's create a little bit more contrast. Maybe make them a little bit more blue rather than that green. Yeah, I think something around there is looking quite nice. So now we're gonna move on to our skin. So I'm gonna enable this layer, and you see as soon as we do that, it looks like we just lost everything. We haven't, it's just, this is taking our primary layer here and moving it straight to our skin, right? And so anything that is visible on our skin layer is going to be shown. And right now there's no effects on that skin layer. And so we are basically seeing what that primary layer looks like, because that look, you know, for lack of a better term, hasn't been applied, right? So what we do now is we go under skin, go under a qualifier, and we are basically just going to try to get our skin. So with our qualifier, we're just going to select some of our skin here, press Shift H, and that is going to show us what our selection is. And right now we can see we're taking a lot of greens, a lot of kind of pinks and magentas. And so we're going to try to dial that in a little bit and try to get more of just actually our skin. So that'll be kind of under our reds and our oranges. And again, we don't just want to make changes for just this image. We want to basically have something that's a ballpark that most shots will fall under. So we know that most skin tones, they're not under our greens, they're not under our magentas, they're under our reds and our oranges. And so I'm keeping it broad enough that it's probably going to catch most skin tones in shots that we do in the future, but have it dialed in enough that we're not gonna, you know, be picking up grass, we're not gonna be picking up anything that falls under our magenta tones. And so we're just gonna dial it in the best we can here. Let's bring it in, you know, ever so slightly more. Beautiful. I really like using qualifiers because, and for saturation and our luminance and our hue, because it just creates more parameters of what it's going to pick up and what it's not. And again, maybe in this shot it looks great, but in a future shot, maybe the saturation on the skin is a little heavier, or maybe it's a little bit less than this shot. And you want to make sure that you are picking up enough that we're going to be able to apply this to most shots, not just the one that we're looking at. Our luminance, we're going to broaden ever so slightly, you know, again, same situation, so that, you know, we know that most of our skin tone should fall in this range, but sometimes they're brighter, sometimes they're darker, and so we want to make sure that we're still going to catch those in our future shots. Beautiful. So now we are going to denoise this image a little bit, and we're going to add some blur. A little bit more. There we go. Beautiful. So now we have just our skin selected. So now if we toggle this on and off, you can see that there's before, there's after. So we're going back. We warmed up our image with that look before, and so you can see when we enable our skin, the skin tones actually get cooler because it's going back to the original. But what this means is that we can adjust this skin just on its own right now. We have complete and full control. And so what we're going to do is we're going to adjust our skin tones with our gamma. And the reason to do that is the same reason as before. We want to make sure that this is applicable to as many clips as possible, and skin tones tend to fall within gamma rather than lift or gain. And so when we adjust our gamma, not only is it within that qualifier that we just made, but we're making sure that any color shifts are also just happening within our gamma. So it's kind of doubling down on making sure that we are qualifying, you know, this image. And so we're gonna warm these skin tones up a little bit. We don't want them too green, we don't want them too magenta. We're just trying to find a good ballpark for those. I think that's looking quite nice. If we full screen that, before, after, it really creates that color contrast. You can see over here we have some, you know, we have more blue and teal kind of in these mountains. And then, you know, we just warm that skin up. We bring it a little bit, you know, towards those reds ever so slightly. And we just get this amazing color contrast. It really brings out her hair. It brings out, you know, both of their skin, and they just really pop in the image now a lot more than they were before. So that's a pretty good place for us. We're going to move on to, or actually the last thing that we're going to do on that skin layer is we're just going to go under our curves, and we're just going to bring that exposure up like just a touch. We don't want to over exaggerate this, but you know, we the most important part of the image, or most images, is going to be the people in it, our skin tones. And so by increasing that contrast ever so slightly, it just draws our eye to them, make sure that they are the most important part of the image. I think that helps us out a lot. I might even increase it just ever so slightly. Before, after. Yeah, that looks great. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to our greens. So I'm going to enable this layer, go under our qualifier, and I'm just going to start to select some of these green tones. The grass, the mountains, all that good stuff. So now you can see what we are getting. Now we're a bit too far. We want it to be more our greens and not our magentas and blues. And so I'm going to start to shift this over so that we're more in that green territory. Okay, if we grab some of our blues, some of these mountains, because it's blue hour, they're falling under, under that blue tone. And so we don't want to, not get any of those mountains. We maybe don't need everything. We want it to mainly be, our greens in here, and then we can grab some of these blues as well, not go too far. That's great. Yeah, we want to make sure that we're not getting any of our skin tones or anything like that. We're going to broaden the luma of this a little bit, just because, yeah, we want to see, we're getting some of our sky there. We don't want that. So maybe we're actually going to tighten up these blues just a little bit. Just get some of those mountains in there, mostly greens. And then, there we go. We get that sky out the best that we can. That is great. We'll broaden our saturation a little bit because, in other shots in the future, it might be a little bit more saturated. And so we want to make sure that we are able to pull those as well. Beautiful. Okay, now we are going to go under our curves, and we're going to go under we have some different options here. So if you see this custom type here, there's this drop-down menu beside it, and so you can select these different curves that you can use. So you can use, hue versus hue, hue versus saturation, hue versus luma, luma versus saturation. You have all these different options to work with. So first of all, we're going to go under hue versus saturation, and we're going to just select the green tone again. And so we're going to go here, and we're going to go over our greens, and you'll see, so we're going to go over here, select our greens. We're just going to broaden this up ever so slightly. And then we're going to drop our saturation just a little bit here. So you can see before, after, we're just taking some of that sting out of that grass, right? And you can see, especially down here, you can see it. Might have gone a little bit too far. I'm going to kind of split the difference here a little bit. Beautiful. And then I'm going to go under our hue versus luma and basically do the same thing. I'm going to grab our grass. I'm going to broaden it ever so slightly. And then I'm just going to darken it a little bit, like right around there. So you can see that. We're just basically taking some of that grass, making it not so, in your face, not so bright, darkening it a little bit. We're taking some of that saturation out of it. That's looking pretty good. Last thing is, I feel like we're still, that grass is still kind of in those blue tones a little bit, because we did create that look, added a lot of blue tones in. And so I think what we're going to do is we're going to go under a hue versus hue, select those greens again. Again, just broaden this a little bit. And I'm just going to shift it towards the oranges a little bit. So we're just warming it up ever so slightly. Yeah, something like that I think is working for me. Yeah, that's great. So it's very subtle. It's not a huge change, but it does help. It just draws our eye towards the subject a little bit more. If we go full screen here, we'll see before, after, before, after. To me, this just kind of unifies the image a little bit. Right now we have, you know, greens and we have oranges and we have some blue tones. And by doing this, it just kind of leaves us in that we have our oranges, we have some blues, and then our greens are there, but they're just not quite as pronounced. And I think that helps tie everything together and feel a little bit more unified. Next, we're going to go under our global adjustment. So this is where I'm going to go under my custom curves. I'm going to go down here and select editable splines. And by doing this, I'm basically just going to create a little bit of an S curve. So I'm going to add a little bit of extra contrast now that we've created our look. So I'm going to bring our highlights up just a little bit. Don't go too far with it. Again, just very subtle adjustments. Each of these layers should be quite subtle. That's looking pretty good right there. You can see before, after. We're just adding that contrast in. You can see like that haze in the mountains is just becoming a little less lifted. We have some deeper tones that we're working with now. I think we can bring our highlights up just a little bit. That's looking great. I am a fan of that. That's great. So now let's move on to our vignette. So this is where we're going to really draw our eye. We did this last time and we'll do it again. So we'll grab a circle. We will bring this a little bit tighter. Kind of put this around our subjects. Beautiful, something like that. Now we're going to go under our tracker and we're just going to track this forward. And it just kind of locks onto them, keeps them, you know, the center of that vignette the whole time. And that is something that's great about Resolve. This is so easy to do, and it's very well built in a way that allows you to do these custom vignettes or custom kind of filters quite easily, and to track it to your footage, which is very helpful. One thing I would say with these is, I talked about before, you know, being able to go from clip to clip and have something apply to, you know, basically everything. The issue with doing these vignettes is if they're custom tracked, that's obviously not going to apply to every clip. And so what you can do is you can either, you know, create a vignette that's just the edges of your frame, and that can apply to all your footage if you have a lot to go through, or maybe you just don't end up doing a vignette. But this doesn't always make sense for every project, and so you just need to use discretion with that. So we're going to go under our curves here, and we're just going to we're going to undo, disable editable splines, and we're just going to bring our center point up a little bit, just increase that contrast ever so, or that exposure ever so slightly. You can see what we've done here, before, after. It is definitely too much and it's not feathered, so we're going to change that right now. We're going to go under our circle and grab these points and just feather it out. That is going to help quite a bit. You can see before, after. Now it's looking a lot smoother. I think we still went too far with it. We're going to bring it back a little bit here. Before, after. That looks much more natural. There we go, before, after. So it just brings out, you know, the focal point of the image. It makes it sure that it's the brightest part. The brightest part of the image is usually what our eye is drawn to. So we want to keep that, those values really under control. We don't want necessarily, you know, the sky is going to be hard to compete with, but we don't want, you know, these mountains or some of these highlights down here. We don't want those to be the brightest part of the image. We want our subjects to be. And so now we're going to do almost the final step. Is to go under our glow, and we're going to go under our effects. I'm going to look up glow, put that onto our layer there, or node there, and then we're going to bring our threshold all the way down. We're going to change this to soft light, and instead of changing the opacity, we're going to adjust our global blend and our spread to adjust the intensity of this effect. So we're going to bring our spread down just a touch here. We're basically looking at like the quality, like how it's affecting our highlights and that blooming. And then from there, then we're gonna adjust the amount. So I kind of like how that looks. It looks quite dreamy, but obviously it's too much. And so we're gonna bring that blend down, and you can see that's original, that's fully on. And so we're gonna find a middle ground here. We're gonna bring it down just a touch. Yeah, even something before, after, even something like that, you know, it just really elevates those highlights. It makes everything feel quite, you know, dreamy. The roll off is quite nice. So I like where we're camped out there, but it does kind of decrease some of our contrast. And so I believe we did this in the last one too, is we're just gonna go under illuminance, and we're gonna change this so that it's not affecting everything in the image. So you can see there, we can kind of select where that point is that this effect actually kicks in. And so I'm just gonna take away some of our, you know, shadows and maybe some of our midtones. I don't want it to rule out our skin tones. And so I'm gonna make sure that our skin tones are still left in there. Especially, you know, his face there. I wanna make sure that that is still in there. I'm okay if some of the shadows on his face aren't in it, and that's okay. And we're gonna make sure that we, you know, change our roll off here. We're gonna add some blur, add some denoise. Beautiful. So now we can see, go full screen, and it's just basically, it's leaving our shadows, but it's affecting everything else in the image, and it's just softening everything out. And I think it ties everything together. It makes it look a little bit more, you know, polished to me. And so I'm gonna leave us right about there. So if we highlight everything and we go, you know, before, after, we've come a pretty long way with this color grade. I think the only thing I'm seeing right now is I still think we're sitting a little bit on the blue side of things. I think we could warm this image up ever so slightly. And I think the way that I'm gonna do this is actually under our look. I think we can just bring some of these blues back a little bit. I think that's really going to land us where we want to be. Yeah, that's in a great spot right there. So again, highlight everything before, after. To me, that looks so much better. You know, we started with our LUT, and I'll show you what it looked like, just our LUT. Sorry, one second, there we go. With just our LUT, we thought that looked good, right? Coming from log to our LUT, to our conversion LUT, we thought that looked great. Now look where we're at. Bringing everything back here, so much better. LUT to finished product, LUT to finished product. And so that's really the power of Resolve. And so that is the longest part of the process, is creating that base look, right? From here, all we can do is, you know, open our gallery here and right click on our image and go grab still, right? So this is kind of saved. When you do grab still, this is basically saved the whole node structure here. And so when you go to our next clip, then what you can do is right click, go apply grade, and now it's applied everything that we've done previous to this moment. So everything, every effect, every node, every effect on every node is copied over to this next clip. And so then what you can do from here is go in and just fine tune, you know, all these parameters, right? Like you can make sure that all the skin that you want is being selected, the stuff that you don't want selected isn't. And that's really the power of Resolve, is you can go in and you can change every step of the process, right? You don't have to start from scratch, or you don't have to have every effect applied. You can easily disable, you know, steps in the process. You can disable, you know, the skin if you want. You can, whatever you want to do, you know, you can change it after the fact. And so we're going to go to this last clip, go apply grade, and now we can see. So this isn't necessarily where we want this though. Our balance is definitely off. And so we're going to go under our exposure here. We're going to bring it down because we're just sitting a little too hot here. right? That's in a better spot. Our white balance might be a little bit different, so we're gonna adjust that. Okay, that went too far with it, so we're gonna just manually kind of change it ever so slightly. Bring our tint back just a little bit. We're falling a little too far towards the greens. Right, now that's landed us in a better spot, right? Like doesn't totally match here. I can see that with the green tones and the blues, that's partly just because we have, a different background here. But, if we want, we can go into the greens, and that's the beauty of this, is we can go into the greens, we can go under, our hue versus luma maybe. We can, bring some of our green tones down if we want. Go under a qualifier, see, are we actually getting what we want? Yes, we are. Go under our hue versus sat. Bring that down a little bit more. See where we're affecting. Right, we could even just go under our, curves in general and say, maybe we want to bring all this down. Maybe it's just drawing too much focus. We can just bring that exposure of those greens down as a whole. Right, like to me, that is looking way better, right? We're bringing down that exposure a little bit. It's less distracting. Our subjects in the middle there are actually the best or the brightest part of the image. And so, you have control over all these things, and I think that really, really helps. I think we might be getting, we're getting a little bit of issue there with the image breaking apart. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go a little bit less, and then we're gonna change our qualifier a little bit, add some denoise, add some blur. Blur is your best friend. That is something that you definitely want to use a lot. It helps a ton. I see we're getting a little bit of her dress, so we might just darken this up a little bit so that we're not getting the dress at all. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, so that's working. There we go, that's bringing down those greens. Yeah, and so basically everything matches. I'm gonna maybe cool this image down just a little bit to match the others. Might actually bring the exposure up just slightly here. They are kind of in the background, so they would be a little bit lighter than if they're closer to the camera, just because, as things get farther away from the camera, the lighter they get, the more kind of haze there is to the image. Yeah, so there we go. So we have all these different shots. We're kind of in the same ballpark. Everything's roughly matching. If you want, you can go in and, change your global adjustments a little bit. You can add more contrast if that's something that you want to do. With, your global adjustments here, maybe you want to go in and, add a little bit more contrast to this shot, just because naturally the way that it was shot, there's a little bit less. Add some deeper tones. Yeah, that's essentially how I would do it, right? And then you're able to copy this from shot to shot to shot, and you basically have the same formula. The only thing that I would do maybe a little bit differently is what you can do, and what I usually will do on bigger projects is I'll create my balance to make sure that I'm working with an accurate image, and then I'll create this whole look structure. And then what I'll do is before I grab the still, before I create the still, I'll actually remove all the effects on this balance, so that this is more generic, so that it's being able to be applied to every clip, and then you can go into every clip and correct it, change the balance on it. But then the rest of this look will have been applied already the way that it should be. But then you can just change the one thing that will vary the most, which is simply balancing the image, making sure that it has the right exposure and the right white balance. And then once you have that locked in, everything else should fall in place. And that's the beauty with a node structure, is that it's non-destructive. Changing that balance it's already baked in as the first thing in that process. And so then everything else will follow. Once you get your skin tones in the right range, then it'll make sure that, your HSL later on with your skin, or your qualifiers rather with your skin, are picking up the right tones. Like it all kind of works together. And so this is what I would do in Resolve with ProRes footage, making sure that I have that balanced layer, and then having all the rest of my nodes from there. So hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of an inside look into the way that I go about color grading something in Resolve when I shoot it in ProRes on the red Komodo. This can be applied to basically any camera. The same philosophy, the same techniques apply no matter what camera you're shooting on. You want to make sure that you color correct, and then you're creating a look and trying to make it replicable from shot to shot. And so hopefully you can use this a little bit on your next project, especially on a big project. This is a really great way to go about having looks that can be applied, and a lot of the work, a lot of the heavy lifting is already done for you. If this video was helpful to you, make sure you go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to this channel as well. That just helps me to know that you want me to make more videos, and just provides a platform where I actually can make that content. And it makes sense for me to make that content, but it also serves you and provides you with helpful content as you go forward in your filmmaking career and filmmaking journey. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.